She woke to the sound of her own name being erased, not spoken, not called, erased. The way a fire consumes paper, quietly and completely, until nothing remains but the shape of what was written. Mara pressed her palm flat against the stone floor of the healer's cottage and breathed through her nose, the way she had taught herself to breathe when the pain was too large for her chest. 3 small bodies stirred in the bed behind her, 3 heartbeats she could feel in her own ribs, familiar as her own pulse, more precious than anything the pack had ever offered her. She did not look at them yet. Looking at them when the grief came fresh was like looking at the sun. She always looked too long, and it always cost her. 5 years. 5 years since the night Callum Ashford, Alpha King of the Iron Veil pack, had stood at the head of the mating altar with his jaw set and his silver eyes fixed on something just past her shoulder, and said the words that unmade her. She was not his mate. He refused the bond. She was dismissed. She had been 19 years old, an Omega, a healer's apprentice, with dirt still under her fingernails and wildflower pollen in her braided hair. She had walked to that altar believing, with the whole stupid, earnest weight of her heart, that the mate bond singing through her blood since the moment she'd touched his hand was real, that it meant something, that he felt it too. He had not, apparently, felt anything worth keeping. What Callum Ashford had not known, what no one in the great hall had known, what Mara herself had barely begun to suspect, was that she was already carrying his heirs. She pressed her palm harder against the floor and listened to the forest. The village of Thornhallow sat at the edge of territory that technically belonged to no pack, which was precisely why she had chosen it. The humans here asked no questions. The few wolves who drifted through were rogues or wanderers, with no allegiance, no reason to carry news back to Ironville. She had built a life in this cottage, with its low ceiling and its herb-hung rafters, its stone hearth, and the small garden where rosemary grew wild and stubborn in the rocky soil. She had built it the way she built everything, carefully, with her hands, asking nothing from anyone. Her children were 5 now. Lena, firstborn by 3 minutes, already showing the silver-tipped fur of an alpha shift. Roan, her second, quieter than the other 2, with his father's jaw and his father's way of going very still when something hurt him. And Calla, named for nothing, named for the way Mara had wept when she first held her, thinking of the wildflowers she'd worn in her hair at that ruined altar. Calla, who smelled of rain and iron and healing, who at 5 years old could already draw a fever out of a sick animal with nothing but her small hands pressed flat against its flank. 3 heirs of Ironvale, hidden in a border cottage, learning to shift by moonlight in a forest that did not belong to their father. Mara finally looked at them. Lena was sprawled diagonally across the bed, as she always was, one arm thrown over her brother's shoulder, hair a dark fan across the pillow. Roan slept curled on his side, knees drawn up, mouth slightly open. Casala was sitting up, blinking at Mara, with those unsettling amber eyes that had come from nowhere in Mara's bloodline and everywhere in Callum's. "Mama," Calla said, in the low, careful voice she used when she sensed something wrong. "Someone is coming." Mara was on her feet before the sentence finished. She crossed to the window, and through the gap in the shutter, she saw what Calla had heard, or felt, or simply known in the way she sometimes knew things. A rider on the road. One rider, no pack colors, a gray cloak, moving at the pace of someone who had been riding all night and did not expect a welcome. Mara's hands moved without her permission, already reaching for the dried yarrow, the iron, salt mixture she kept by the window, the small bone-handled knife she had not needed in 5 years, but had never put away. Her body remembered things her mind preferred to forget. She had been a healer's apprentice, yes, but she had also spent 2 years after her rejection learning every herb that could drop a wolf, and every word in the old tongue that could seal a door. Stay in the bed, she told her children. Stay shifted if you need to. Do not come out unless I call for you. Lena was already awake, silver eyes sharp, showing none of the usual morning complaint. Roan sat up and pulled his sister against him in that instinctive way he had, shielding without being asked. Kala watched Mara with that ancient-eyed calm of hers and said nothing more. Mara tied her hair back, stepped into her boots, and went to meet the rider. The morning air hit her like cold water, carrying pine and frost and wood smoke. And, beneath all of that, something she had not smelled in 5 years. Something she had spent 5 years teaching herself to forget. Something her wolf recognized before her mind did. The ridge of awareness that ran up her spine like a struck bell, low and resonant, and deeply, bitterly unwelcome. Iron veal. The rider smelled of iron veal pack. She planted herself in the middle of the path and waited. The gray cloak resolved into a woman as the rider reined in. Older than Mara, perhaps 40, with the compact build and careful eyes of a pack enforcer who had learned when to stop looking dangerous. She pulled back her hood. Mara did not recognize her face, but she recognized the insignia on the clasp at her throat. A thorned circle in silver, the sigil of the Alpha King's personal guard. Mara Voss, the woman said. Not a question. I don't use that name. She had not used Voss in 5 years. Voss was the name of a girl who walked to an altar in good faith. She was something else now. The name your father registered you under, the woman said, without inflection. I'm not here to argue about names. My name is Dina. I serve the Alpha King of Ironvale directly. I've been riding for 4 days. Then you should rest somewhere else. Dina did not move. She had the look of someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times and was prepared for all the versions of it. The Alpha King is dying, Mara. The cold moved through her differently then. Not the cold of the morning air, not the defensive cold she'd wrapped around herself like armor since the door swung open. A deeper cold, one she had no defense prepared for. Her wolf went very quiet. That, Mara said carefully, is not my concern. He's been cursed. A blood curse. Old magic. The healers at Ironvale have spent 14 months trying to break it, and they can't. He's losing the ability to shift. In another month, they estimate he'll lose the ability to regenerate. After that, Dina stopped, swallowed, and in that pause Mara saw, past the professional blankness, something real. Grief, genuine grief, from a woman who had served this man and believed in him. There is one possibility left, one thread in the old texts. The curse was cast through a broken mate bond. Mara heard her own pulse in her ears. The only way to break it, Dina continued, her voice steady again but softer, is through the restoration of the bond, through the one he rejected. If the rejected mate is still living, if she is willing, no. The word came out quiet, absolute. Dina looked at her for a long moment. He doesn't know I'm here. He didn't send me. He would not ask this of you. He believes you're dead. There was a report 3 years ago, a fire in a village. We thought. I know what you thought. Mara had set that particular fire for herself, a small, careful lie she'd constructed when she began to suspect that pack trackers were getting too close. Nothing had burned but a record in a border post registry. It had been enough. He thinks I'm dead. Good. Keep thinking it. Mara. Dina swung down from her horse in one smooth motion and stood in the road facing her. Up close, her eyes were brown and exhausted and direct. I am not here as a pack enforcer. I came alone, in civilian clothes, without sanction or authorization. If you send me away, I will go. But I have to ask. I have to ask you to understand what I'm telling you. He is going to die. The pack will fracture without an alpha of his bloodline. 14 packs in the Ironvale Alliance. 400,000 wolves. Don't! Mara's voice came out sharper than she intended. Don't make me responsible for 400,000 wolves. Don't stand in my path and do that. I'm not making you responsible. I'm telling you the truth and giving you the choice." They stood there in the morning light, the two of them, while somewhere behind Mara in the cottage, 3 small children held very still and breathed very quietly. "I need you to leave," Mara said, "now, and I need you to forget this road." Dina looked at her for one more long moment, then reached into her cloak and held out a small sealed letter. "He wrote this 2 months ago. When he first understood what the curse required, he thought you were dead. He wrote it anyway," he said, "and I am repeating exactly what he said, that he wanted someone to carry it to wherever your grave was, so the words would be in the same earth as your bones." She extended her arm further. "Take it or don't, but I think you should take it." Mara took the letter. She did not open it. She stood there with it in her hand, feeling the wax seal against her thumb. The thorned circle again pressed deep, not a formal seal, but a personal one, and she did not open it. Dina remounted. "I'll be in Thornhallow at the inn for 3 days. After that, I'll go back to Ironvale and watch my king die." She gathered her reins, settled her hood. "I am sorry for what he did to you. I know what it cost you. I watched that night. I have never, in 20 years of service, I have never forgiven him for it. But I am asking you to choose better than he did." She rode away down the path. Mara stood in the road for a long time after the sound of hoofbeats faded. The letter felt very small in her hand. The wax seal was the color of old blood. When she went back inside, Calla was standing by the door. "Mama," her amber eyes moved to the letter. "Is it him?" Mara looked at her youngest daughter. This child, who sensed things she should not be able to sense at 5 years old. This child, who had her father's bone structure and her father's unbearable stillness, and felt the grief move through her like weather. "Come here," she said instead of answering. She gathered all 3 of them, Lena pressing in against her left side, Roan leaning against her back, Calla burrowing under her chin, and she held them in the doorway of their small, safe house and breathed them in. Pine sap and morning sleepiness and the faint, clean animal warmth of young wolves. Her children, her reason for every decision she had made since the night she walked away from an altar, with a broken bond and a secret she hadn't yet understood. She held them, and she did not open the letter. Not yet. The day moved the way days did in Thornhallow, slow, rooted, purposeful. She sent the children out to the garden while she prepared her morning rounds. 3 families in the village were under her care. Old Pemberton with his winter joints, the Yaros infant still struggling with a chest infection, the widow Callahan who had taken a bad fall before the first frost. Mara moved between them with her basket and her careful hands, the same as every other morning. She asked questions, she listened, she left remedies. She did not think about the letter. She did not think about a man with silver eyes standing at an altar with his jaw set and his gaze fixed on something past her shoulder. She thought about yarrow and slippery elm, and the yarrow's baby's improving color, and whether Rowan's pre-shift aches would be better or worse in the cold season, and whether there was enough preserved rosehip in the pantry to last until spring. When she came home in the afternoon, the children were in the yard playing some elaborate game that involved Lena shifting halfway and immediately unshifting with great drama, and Roan building a structure out of sticks that Calla was systematically knocking down with an expression of philosophical interest. The letter was where she had left it on the shelf above the hearth. She looked at it the way you look at something you've made a decision about. She made supper. She bathed 3 tired, muddy children. She read to them from the book of old tales she'd brought from the pack library the night she left. The only thing she'd taken besides her healer's satchel and the clothes on her back. She listened to their breathing even out one by one, until all three were asleep. Then she took the letter down from the shelf, sat in her chair by the fire, and broke the seal. The handwriting was not what she expected. She had always imagined, in the rare, unguarded moments when she imagined anything about Callum Ashford at all, that he would have cold, precise handwriting, ruler straight, impersonal. What she found instead was uneven, pressured. The writing of someone working through pain, the letters sometimes retraced, sometimes abandoned mid-word and restarted. It said, "I do not ask your forgiveness. I do not believe I have earned the right to ask anything of you. What I did on our mating night was wrong, and I have understood it to be wrong every day since. The reasons I gave were not lies. There was a threat. There was a reason I believed I was protecting you by refusing the bond. I cannot explain it now, and I will not use it as excuse. It was wrong. You deserved better than the choice I made. If you can hear this wherever you are, I want you to know that I never stopped sensing the broken place where the bond should have been. It has been with me every day, like a door left open in winter. I was cold for 5 years, and I told myself it was the right kind of cold. I was wrong about that too. That was all. No signature. As if he knew the name at the bottom would mean nothing, or everything, and he could not make himself find out which. Mara sat by the fire for a long time, the letter on her knee, the fire burning low. Outside, the forest moved in the wind, and the 3 heartbeats she loved most in the world pulsed steadily in the bedroom behind her. She thought about the mate bond. She thought about the way it had felt when he refused it. Not like a rejection, not like a humiliation, though it had been both of those things. It had felt like something being amputated while she was still awake. She had learned in the months afterward that a broken bond did not simply vanish. It calcified. It became a scar in the wolf's nature. She had lived with that scar for 5 years, and she knew its shape the way she knew the calluses on her own hands. She thought about Calla's face that morning. I think someone is coming. Calla, who had never met her father, who had inherited his best and most inconvenient quality, the absolute inability to look away from things that needed to be seen. She thought about 400,000 wolves and a fracturing alliance, and none of that was her problem. None of it. She had not asked to be mated to a king. She had not asked to be refused and sent away with 3 children, growing undetected under her heart. She thought about a man writing a letter to a dead woman. She thought about the way he had said it in that letter. I was cold for 5 years, and I told myself it was the right kind of cold. She thought about her children, who had his eyes and her hands, and a right to a world that did not crack apart along pack lines. She thought about Lena's alpha instincts already showing strong and proud, about Rowan's quiet courage, about Calla laying her small hands on a feverish rabbit and drawing the heat out of it. She thought about all of this, and she sat very still by the dying fire, and she let herself feel the scar where the bond had been, and she found, to her own complicated fury, that it was not as thick as she had believed. She went to Thornhallow the next morning. Dina was at the inn, as she'd said, sitting alone at a table with a cup of something hot and the look of a woman who had not slept. She looked up when Mara came through the door, and something moved through her eyes. Not triumph, not relief exactly, something quieter. She waited. Mara sat down across from her. "Tell me everything about the curse, every detail the texts gave you." Dina told her. It took 2 days to arrange. Mara had conditions, not demands, not ultimatums, but conditions stated clearly and without apology. And Dina agreed to each of them with the careful attention of someone who understood they were not negotiating. The children would not be revealed until Mara chose to reveal them. Mara would travel as a healer, not as a rejected mate, not as anything that required explanation at court. She would assess the curse directly. She would determine if the bond restoration was genuinely necessary and genuinely possible. And if at any point she decided to leave, she would leave, and that would be final. She told her children that evening. "We're going on a journey," she said, "somewhere I used to know." Lena immediately demanded to know if there would be other wolves. Roan went very still the way he did. Calla looked at her mother with those amber eyes and said, in her careful ancient feeling way, "Will we meet him there?" Mara sat with that question for a moment. "Maybe," she said. "We'll see." "I already know what he smells like," Calla said. Mara looked at her. "How?" Calla pointed to the letter on the table. "You held that all night. It's in your hands now." Mara looked down at her own hands and understood, not for the first time, that her youngest daughter was going to be either the most formidable healer in 3 generations or a prophet, and she wasn't sure which was more demanding to parent. The road to Ironville took 3 days. They traveled in Dina's covered wagon, the children treating it as an adventure, the miles rolling under them while Mara read Dina's collected notes on the curse and tried to stay in the objective clinical frame that had kept her functional for 5 years. She was a healer. She would assess a cursed patient. She would do what could be done. She would not feel things she had no business feeling. This was a plan that collapsed somewhere around the 2nd day, when Roan, who had been silent for most of the journey, pressed his face against her shoulder and said, "Mama, is the place we're going to the place you left?" "Yes," she said. "Was it bad there?" She considered the view through the wagon's canvas gap. The forests were thinning into the wider territory of the Central Pack lands. The trees different here, older, heavier, the kind of trees that had grown up under the specific weight of an ancient pack's claim. She could smell the change in the air. "Parts of it," she said, "but not all of it." Roan considered this with the gravity of a child, processing an answer that was technically truthful. "Will it be bad now? I'm going to make sure it isn't." He nodded, pressed closer, said nothing more. The gates of Ironville rose out of the morning mist on the 3rd day, and Mara's wolf went very, very still inside her. The way wolves go still when they smell something enormous and haven't yet decided whether to run or stand their ground. The great thorned arch, the pack colors hanging in the cold air, black and silver. The guards at the gate, who looked at Dina and stepped aside. Inside the great hall, everything smelled of him. She had prepared for many things. She had not prepared for that. 5 years, and the scent of this place was still mapped in her body like the layout of a room she'd grown up in. Stone and cedar and cold iron, and something beneath all of it that was simply him. The specific frequency of Callum Ashford that her wolf had been reaching for and being denied for 5 years, like a note played endlessly on a string that had been cut. She breathed through it. She kept her face arranged. Dina led her through corridors she half remembered, past faces she mostly didn't know. The court had changed in 5 years, the way courts always do. New advisors, new guards, new hierarchies. Good. Fewer people to recognize her. She kept her children close, Lena on one side, Roan and Calla on the other, and moved through the stone hallways like a healer on a consultation and nothing else. They stopped her at the Alpha's chamber door. One of the senior guards, a big man, gray-templed, with the look of someone who had stood outside this particular door for a very long time, looked at Dina with flat displeasure. "You left without authorization," he said to Dina. Then his eyes moved to Mara, to the 3 children with her. He looked at them for a moment with an expression she couldn't read. "The Alpha King is not receiving visitors." "He'll receive this one," Dina said. "Dina, he'll receive her, and he won't forgive you for keeping her out." Dina met his eyes, and something passed between them. He looked at Mara again, looked at the children, at Roan specifically, for longer than was comfortable, and Mara watched his face change in a way she recognized. The involuntary recognition of bloodline, of scent, of pack inheritance that wolves could not suppress when it was strong enough. He looked back at Dina. He opened the door. The room was large and simply furnished, the way the rooms of practical men tended to be. A great bed, a work table buried under documents, bookshelves that ran floor to ceiling. A fire that had been built up but wasn't keeping the chill out the way it should have been. That alone told her something. A healthy wolf ran warm. The inability to hold heat was an early marker of the kind of deterioration Dina had described. Callum Ashford sat at the table with his back to the door. He was thinner than she remembered. The breadth of his shoulders was still there. The posture still carrying the particular quality of a man who had never learned how to appear less than he was. But there was something underneath it that was wrong. A tightness, a labor. As if maintaining that uprightness was costing him something it hadn't cost him before. His hair was still dark. She had forgotten somehow how dark it was. He said, without turning, "Dina, I told you. You told me a great many things," Dina said quietly. "Most of them were wrong." He turned then, and his eyes found Mara. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has a physical dimension. It occupied space. It had weight and temperature. Mara stood in it and felt the scar in her wolf nature flare like a struck match. That jagged, calcified place suddenly hot, with something she did not have a controlled clinical word for. His eyes were silver in the firelight, exactly the same as they had been at 19. The jaw was the same. The particular way he went completely still when something broke through his composure. She remembered that. She had spent 5 years not thinking about how well she remembered that. His gaze moved, past her, to the children. She watched it happen, watched him process, watched his eyes go to Lena, silver-eyed, dark-haired, with his jawline, to Roan, his face more clearly, undeniably, brutally his own face, made young and soft and open, to Calla, who was watching him with those amber eyes, as if she had been waiting her whole small life for this specific moment and was neither surprised nor overwhelmed by it. Callum Ashford looked at his 3 children for the first time and made a sound so low it was barely audible. Something that was not a word, not quite a groan. Something that came from a place too deep in his chest for language, and put his hand over his face. Mara did not let herself feel anything about that. She was a healer. She had a job. "Sit down," she said. Her voice came out level and professional. "I need to assess the curse progression before I decide what's possible." He dropped his hand from his face. His eyes were very bright. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he believed he had destroyed, finding it standing in front of him, intact and furious. Mara, just that, her name in his voice. She had forgotten. She had made herself forget the specific way he said it. Like it was a word that contained something he had no other word for. "Sit down, please," she said. He sat. She crossed the room and made herself treat it as a clinical space. Made herself treat the steady, overwhelming scent of him as data rather than memory. She set her satchel on the table beside him and took out her instruments. The tuning stones, the silver thread she used for curse assessment, the small sealed vials of diagnostic oils. She felt his eyes on her face the whole time, but she did not look at him directly. "Give me your hand." He extended it. She picked up his hand in both of hers and felt the mate bond scar flare so hard she almost made an audible sound. His hand tensed in hers. He felt it too. Of course he felt it. The broken bond was the source of the curse. The open wound that the dark magic had found and colonized, and proximity to the rejected mate would make the whole system sing with suppressed recognition. She breathed through it, pressed her thumbs to his pulse points, reached inward with the healer's sense, the trained ability to read the flow of vital energy through a body, and found the curse exactly where Dina's notes had said it would be. Threaded through his wolf nature like a black wire, woven around every point where the mate bond had been severed, strangling his ability to shift by inches. It was bad. Worse than the notes had described, actually, because whoever had written those notes had been working from external observation, and Mara was reading it from the inside, and she could feel the places where the wire had tightened further in the past several weeks. He had less time than Dina knew. She kept her face neutral. She kept her hands steady. "How long has the cold been this bad?" she asked, without looking up from his pulse. 2 months. His voice was controlled. The voice of a man who had spent a great deal of time controlling his voice in this specific context. "I can still shift, but it takes longer than it should, and I lose heat afterward. The headaches. When did those start?" A pause. "You can tell about the headaches?" "Occipital tension. Your pulse has a specific quality when there's intracranial pressure from curtailed regeneration." She looked up finally because she needed to assess his eyes for the specific dilation pattern that would tell her how far the neurological interference had progressed. She looked directly at him for the first time. It was a mistake, or it was inevitable, or those two things were sometimes the same. Up close, in the firelight, she could see what the curse had done, not just physically. The pallor, the lines carved by pain around his mouth, the slight tremor in his hand that she felt more than saw, but in his eyes. He was looking at her with the combined expression of a man in physical pain and a man in a different and older kind of pain. And those two things were woven through each other, and she could not entirely separate them into something she could process cleanly. "Mara," he said again, quieter. "I need to. Not now," she said. "Medical assessment first. Everything else waits." He closed his mouth, complied. Let her work. Behind her, she heard the small sounds of her children settling. Dina had guided them to the window bench with the calm efficiency of a woman who had understood her job correctly. Mara could feel all three of them in her peripheral wolf sense, steady and close, and she used that steadiness to anchor herself as she worked through the full assessment. An hour, perhaps more. She cataloged the curse's architecture with the same systematic care she gave any complex pathology, dictating notes to herself under her breath, following the dark thread through his system to map its full extent. When she finally set his hand down, she sat back and looked at her notes for a long moment. "Can you break it?" Dina asked from across the room. Mara looked at what she had written. She looked at the specific structure of the curse. She looked at the way it had rooted itself in every fracture point of the severed bond, using those fractures the way a vine uses cracks in stone. And she understood precisely what it would take to break it, and precisely how complicated that was going to be. "The bond restoration is the only viable path," she said. "Partial restoration won't be enough. The curse is too thoroughly embedded. It needs a full bond reconnection to have something to dissolve into. Half measures will buy time but not resolution." The room was very quiet. "A full bond reconnection requires consent from both parties," Mara continued in her most clinical voice. "And it requires that both parties understand what they're consenting to. This is not a medical procedure I can simply perform. It's a mutual act, which means the conversation that has been waiting for 5 years happens now, tonight, and both parties get to speak and be heard. Those are my terms." She looked at Callum Ashford directly. He met her eyes. His jaw worked. He looked like a man who had been bracing for a blow for 5 years and found that the actual blow, when it came, was both worse and more bearable than anticipated. "Yes," he said. "Whatever you need, not whatever I need. What is true?" She folded her hands on the table. "I'm going to tell you what happened after that night. And then you're going to tell me what you told that letter." All of it. And we're going to do this while my children are in the room, because they are old enough to understand that difficult things can be spoken about honestly, and because they deserve to be here for whatever happens next. She paused. Do you understand? Yes, he said, and then very quietly, helplessly, how could I not understand? How could I not, Mara there? He stopped. His eyes moved again to the children, and she watched him fight for composure with everything he had. Their names, she said, are Lena, Roan, and Kala. She watched him absorb each name, watched him find himself in each face in the specific way that parents do, not a search, but a recognition, an arrival. They are 5 years old. They are healthy. Lena is an alpha. Roan is a healer like me. Kala is, she searched for the word. Kala is Kala. From the window bench, Kala said in her small, careful voice, I know who you are. Callum turned toward her. Kala regarded him with those amber eyes, serene and direct, and said nothing further. The fire cracked. The wind moved outside the heavy stone walls. Mara sat across from the man who had broken something essential in her and had bled for it for 5 years without knowing, and she let the room hold all of it. The grief, the damage, the 3 small, irreplaceable lives that had come from the wreckage, the bond scar that had just spent an hour flaring under her hands like a coal not quite gone cold. That night, she said, tell me why. And he told her. The threat had been real. She had not known that, had not had any way of knowing it. A rival pack, old enemies with old magic, who had discovered the mate bond forming and sent word that the moment the bond was completed, they would curse it, curse her, use the bond as a conduit to destroy him from within. He had received the warning 3 hours before the ceremony. He had had no time to investigate, no time to consult, no time to do anything but make the choice in front of him, complete the bond and give his enemies ease a direct channel into his core vulnerability, or refuse it, break it, and trust that an omega with no political significance would be safer for not being bonded to him. He had told himself she would be safer. He had told himself she would find another mate, another life, someone who would not make her a target. He had not considered that she might be carrying his children. He had not known. He had not let himself think past the necessity of the decision he believed he was making in her interest. He had spent 5 years knowing it had been wrong anyway. I should have told you, he said. Even if I still made the same choice, I should have told you the reason. I should have found a way. The silence was cowardice, and I have known that every day. He paused. When I heard you were dead, He stopped, pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose, a gesture she recognized. The way you recognize us tell you have memorized without meaning to. He used that gesture when he was fighting to stay composed. She had seen it twice, the night of the mating ceremony, and she had stored it without understanding why. There was nothing I could do with that. There was nowhere for it to go. I know, she said, and was surprised by how true it was when she said it. Not forgiving him, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but knowing it, believing it, holding it as a real thing. I know there was a threat. I didn't know that. I thought. She stopped, let herself say it. I thought you simply found me insufficient. An omega, a healer's apprentice. Nothing that matched what an alpha king was supposed to want. He looked at her with an expression that was almost anger in its intensity, except it was directed entirely inward. You were the only thing I have ever wanted without reservation, he said. That was the problem. The bond was complete for me from the moment I touched your hand. Everything after that was, I was trying to protect something I had no right to protect that way. The silence this time was different, less cold. From the window bench, Lena had migrated to sit beside Roan, both of them watching, with the focused attention of children who understand that something large and important is happening, even if they can't name all its parts. Calla had gotten down from the bench at some point, without Mara noticing, and was standing beside Callum's chair, close enough that her shoulder almost touched his arm. Not seeking contact, not offering it, just standing there, in proximity. The way she stood beside sick animals, present steady, somehow communicating through presence alone that things were going to be all right. Callum looked down at her with an expression that cracked something in Mara's chest. "Calla," Mara said gently. "Give him a little space." "He needs it," Calla said, with her 5-year-old certainty. "The warmth. He can't hold it by himself. I'm helping." Mara looked at her daughter and then looked at Callum and saw, beneath the controlled exterior, that Calla was right. The constant subtle shivering, the pallor, it had diminished slightly in the past few minutes. A 5-year-old healer, standing close to her father, without touching him, radiating the specific quality of her mother's gift. Mara sat with the complicated beauty of that for a moment. "All right," she said. "Stay then." Roan had been very quiet through everything. Mara checked on him with her wolf sense, steady, watchful, processing. He was like her in that way. He would not speak until he had something to say, and when he spoke, it would be exact. She waited. "Can you fix him?" Roan asked finally. "I'm going to try," Mara said. "Not try." Roan looked at her with his father's directness. "You never just try. You always know if you can or can't before you try." Mara, this quiet, careful child, with her father's face and her own precision, and felt a complicated pride threaded through with grief and something that might eventually become something lighter. "Yes," she said, "I can fix it." "Okay," said Roan, and sat back with the decisive simplicity of a child who has received the information he needed and filed it correctly. Lena, who has been restraining herself with visible effort for the last 20 minutes, burst out. "Are we going to live here?" The question landed in the room like a stone in still water. Mara felt its ripples. She did not look at Callum. "We're going to take one thing at a time," she said. "That always means yes, but it's complicated," Lena told Roan in a loud whisper. Dina made a sound that was almost a laugh. Callum was looking at Mara, not at the children, not at the room, not at the work table, buried under the documentation of a pack being held together by the sheer force of a dying man's will. At her, with the expression of a man who has been living in a winter that never changed, standing in the first day of a thaw, and not yet certain he trusts it enough to put down his coat. "Mara," he said. She met his eyes. "I need to say this before whatever comes next, in case whatever comes next makes it harder." He shifted in his chair, straightening with the careful effort of someone managing chronic pain. And the motion brought him closer, and the bond scar in her chest responded like a harp string plucked without permission. "I spent 5 years believing I had made a necessary sacrifice. I told myself the coldness was the cost of a responsible choice, and I was paying it. I told myself I had protected you." His voice was even. But there was something underneath it that was not even at all. "I protected nothing. I lost everything. And I made you carry everything I should have been carrying with you. And I didn't know. And not knowing doesn't make it." "Mara." She felt the word in her bones. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight," he said. "I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel. I am asking you to let me spend whatever time I have left earning something different than what I gave you that night, if you stay." He stopped. His jaw was tight with everything he was holding. "If you stay, I will never stand in a position of authority over you again. I will never make a choice that belongs to you without you. I will ask. Every time. I will ask." He looked at the children, one by one. Lena, who had gone uncharacteristically still. Roan, whose eyes were wet in a way he was absolutely not going to acknowledge. Calla, who had placed one small hand on the armrest of his chair without looking at it, which was, coming from Calla, practically a declaration. How could I not know? More quietly, almost to himself. How could I not see what I had already made, even when I didn't know I had made it? He shook his head slowly. She can hold heat I've been losing for a year. She's 5 years old and she's already doing what it takes me concentrated effort to do. He looked at Mara. She has your hands, Mara breathed, steadied. Let herself stay in the room without the clinical distance she'd been using as a buffer. And let the room be what it was. Complicated and irreversible, and full of people who were all going to have to figure out what happened next with nothing but honesty as their only navigational tool. The bond restoration, she said. It will hurt. The curse will fight it. The reconnection has to override what the dark magic has been feeding on, which means the bond will have to activate fully and quickly. And both of us will feel the full weight of the 5-year break dissolving at once. It will be. She paused, trying to find the accurate clinical word and finding that there wasn't one. It will be intense. Yes, he said. No hesitation. I need a night to prepare the space. Specific conditions, the old herbs, the speaking of the bond words. The physical contact has to be maintained throughout, or the reconnection can fragment. She looked at him carefully. We don't have to stay mated once it's done. The bond restoration will break the curse and stabilize you regardless of what we choose afterward. I need you to understand that. You have a choice in what happens after. Something moved through his face, something that might have been pain of a specific kind. Is that what you want? He asked carefully. A restoration that leaves us both free to choose again. She sat with that. I want, she said, to not make any promises tonight that I can't keep honestly. I need time. I need to see if what you're telling me matches what I observe. I have 3 children and a life I built without any help from anyone, and I don't surrender those things on the strength of one conversation, no matter how long the night is. That's fair, he said. That is more than fair. But I'm staying until you're stable, she added. That is not a concession. It's medicine. Don't read more into it than it is. I won't, he said. And then, quietly, with the corner of his mouth moving in something that was nearly, not quite, but nearly, a smile. Though I'll admit it's very difficult not to read more into the fact that you're here at all. Mara stood and gathered her satchel before he could see whatever her face did with that. The preparation took most of the night. Dina helped, silent and efficient, finding what Mara asked for from the castle's stores with the competence of someone who had been making herself useful in crisis situations for 20 years. The children slept in the chamber's adjoining room in the great bed. Lena and Roan burrowed together, Calla carefully placed on the outer edge as if she had designated herself night watch. Mara worked by firelight with her herbs and her silver thread, and the old words she had learned in the border cottage from books she'd requested from traveling merchants and never explained why she needed. She had read about bond restoration in the abstract, academic way. She'd read about many things she'd hoped she would never need, and she had kept reading every year because there was a part of her that had never fully let go. That part of her had made her learn the words, had made her practice the thread work, had made her prepare for something she had told herself was never going to happen. She had been preparing for this for 5 years without admitting it. Around the 3rd hour of preparation, when the castle was fully quiet, and even Dina had finally taken herself to sleep in the chair by the fire, Callum came to stand beside the work table where she was laying out the last of the components. He didn't speak. He stood at an appropriate distance and watched with his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw slightly tight. She let him stand there. In the letter, she said, without looking up, you said the break had felt like a door left open in winter, that you'd been cold. Yes, I felt it as an amputation. She kept her voice even. I've used that specific word to myself over the years, an amputation. The ghost of a limb, reaching for something I could still feel the shape of, but couldn't quite close my hand around. She placed the last of the silver thread in its position. That's what a severed bond does. The wolf doesn't stop reaching. It just reaches into nothing every time. He was quiet for a moment. Does it? He stopped. Does it hurt still? She finally looked at him. You've been in the same room as me for 6 hours. Has it hurt having me here? He looked at her with a kind of stripped-down honesty that she remembered, had always remembered, even when she was telling herself she remembered nothing. That whatever else he was, he had this one quality, the inability to lie when directly confronted with a direct question. No, he said. It's the first time in 5 years I've been warm. Same, she said, and went back to her work before either of them had to figure out what to do with that. The ritual itself began an hour before dawn. She had cleared the center of the room, firelight, and the preparations she had set. The silver thread drawn in the specific pattern, the herbs burning low and slow in their small iron pots, the old words already present on her tongue. Callum sat across from her on the floor, cross-legged, which was not a position she would have expected him to accept without protest, and which he accepted without a word. He was watching her with steady silver eyes, and she could feel his wolf reaching toward her bond scar with the same involuntary urgency that hers was reaching toward him. When I take your hands, she said, the bond will begin to reconnect immediately. Before you can it fully, the curse will push back. It's going to hurt, and it's going to feel for a moment like it's getting worse before it gets better. Don't break contact. Whatever it feels like, don't break contact. If you break contact mid-reconnection, we'll be in worse shape than when we started. I understand. Do you want to ask anything before we begin? He thought for a moment. She watched him decide what the most important thing was. Are you afraid? He asked. She was surprised by the question, surprised more by the honesty of her answer. Yes, but not of the ritual. He nodded. I know what you're afraid of, he said, and I understand it. And I'm not going to promise you I won't make mistakes. I'm going to promise you that I'll tell you when I do, and I'll ask, and Mara, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have reason to regret staying. She held that, set it somewhere careful. Then she picked up his hands. The bond came back like dawn, not like a lightning strike, not like the dramatic rupture she had half expected, but like light coming slowly over a horizon, incremental, and then suddenly total, the warmth moving through the scar tissue from both directions. At once, her wolf's endless reaching, finally closing around something solid. Something that was his wolf, reaching back with the same 5-year weight of yearning and restraint. She felt him fully, the way she had felt him for the first time at 19. The specific emotional quality of Callum Ashford. The depth of him, the tenderness he had buried under necessity and misidentified as coldness. The love that had been sitting sealed in the broken space of him, like a letter written to a dead woman. The curse fought. She had said it would. She had been right. The dark magic convulsed through the reconnecting bond like something that knew it was dying, spiking cold and sharp and wrong. And she felt him tense in her hands and heard his breath change, and she pressed her thumbs harder into his pulse points and said the old words without breaking rhythm, the cadence carrying them both through the worst of it. She felt her own pain in that moment, the full accumulated 5-year weight of the severed bond's ache releasing at once, and it was not unlike what she had said. An amputation reversed. The ghost limbs suddenly, shockingly real, the sense of wholeness so sudden and complete that it was its own kind of overwhelming. And then the curse broke. She felt it go, a snapping release, like ice cracking under spring weight. and then warmth, rushing through the bond in both directions, the places the curse had colonized with something that was simply life, simply health, simply the bond doing what it had been made to do. His wolf coming back fully online, his regenerative capacity flooding back, his ability to hold heat roaring in all at once. He made a sound against her hands. Not pain, not quite that anymore, but something that was release and grief and relief fused into a single involuntary exhale. She held on until she was certain the reconnection was complete. Checked the pulse points. Read the vital flow. Found it clear and strong and clean. All the dark wire dissolved. Nothing remaining but the bond itself, which was not a wound anymore, and had not been a wound from the first moment she touched him. It had always been what it was, a connection, a recognition. Two wolves who had found each other and been pulled apart by circumstances too large for either of them and had spent 5 years in the echo of it. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who had just been given back. Something they had been convinced was irretrievable. Better? She asked. Yes. His voice was rough. The hand that was not in hers had come up at some point and was resting against his own chest over his sternum, where the bond would be resonating strongest now. Yes, Mara, how did you? He stopped. His jaw was tight but not with pain now. 5 years of dead weight. I'd forgotten what it was supposed to feel like. Your color is already better, she said, in her clinical voice, and was aware of what a transparent refuge it was, and was momentarily grateful he didn't call her on it. He did not call her on it. He turned her hands over in his, gently, the way you handle something you've been terrified to hold, and looked at her knuckles, the calluses from 5 years of healer's work and frontier living, and said nothing. His thumbs moved over her palms, tracing the places where the work had marked her, and she let him. You built something, he said quietly. You built an entire life. I had to, she said. Someone had to. Yes, he looked up from her hands to her face. I know I made that necessary. I am. He stopped. Started again. Thank you is not adequate. I don't have the word. I don't think there is one. There isn't, she agreed. But that doesn't mean I don't need to hear you try. Something moved through his face that was almost humor, and then was just warmth. The specific, unexpected warmth she had found in him at 19 before everything else happened. The warmth that lived underneath everything else in him like a banked fire, and that she had told herself she had imagined. She had not imagined it. I love you, he said. Simple, direct, stated without preamble or framework. The way you say a thing when you have been waiting to say it for so long that the moment for preamble has passed. I have loved you since the moment I touched your hand. I have spent 5 years loving you, while believing you were gone, and it did not diminish, not by a fraction. And now you are here and you have given me back my life, and you have brought. He looked toward the door that led to the adjoining room. You brought them. You kept them safe, and you brought them here. And you sat across from me, and you did the most difficult thing I have ever asked of anyone without my even asking it. His voice was not entirely steady now. How could I not love you? How could I not love every single impossible, unyielding, brilliant part of you? Mara sat with that. She sat with it the way she had sat with the letter by the fire, taking its weight seriously, not rushing past it to the easier thing. He waited. He was good at waiting now, she realized. He had learned it. The specific patience of a man who knows he is not owed a response and is choosing to give space instead of pressure. That, too, was different from the young man who had stood at an altar and made a unilateral choice without asking her anything. I don't forgive you completely, she said. Tonight doesn't. Tonight doesn't resolve 5 years. That's a longer work. Yes, he said. I know. And my children. She stopped, corrected herself deliberately. Our children are not leverage. and they are not a reason. And if you think that their existence obligates me to anything, you have badly misread how I make decisions. I know, he said. I know that. I would not. I know you wouldn't, she said. I just needed to say it out loud. She looked at their still joined hands. I am also. And I am saying this once, clearly. And then we are not going to make it dramatic. I am also not over the fact that the door was not closed. Even all the reasons aside, the door was not closed on what I felt for you. It has been 5 years and the door was not closed. He said nothing, just looked at her, and the bond between them was warm and present and whole. And the first gray light of dawn was beginning to come in around the edges of the shutters. And from the room beyond the door, she could hear the small sounds of children beginning to stir. Lena is going to have opinions about the breakfast situation in this palace, Mara said. He made a sound that was definitively a laugh. Quiet and a little raw but real. I'll speak to the kitchen personally, he said. Rowan won't ask for anything. Make sure someone asks him. I'll ask him. And Calla, I know, he said softly. I'll watch and follow her lead. She'll tell me what she needs, in her own way. Mara looked at him, looked at this man who had been learning, in the past several hours, to speak the specific language of her children after a single evening, and who was doing it with careful, earnest attention. And she allowed herself to feel something she had been keeping behind the clinical distance all night, something warm and exhausted and afraid and stubborn and quietly, reluctantly beginning to hope. She did not say any of that. Let's go wake them up, she said instead. She stood. He stood with her, and the bond sang between them, steady and settled, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just presence, just the rightness of a connection, restored to what it had always been meant to be. She was still afraid. She still had 5 years of evidence that things could go wrong in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had 3 children to protect, and a self she had built from scratch, and a life she was not going to dissolve into someone else's narrative. No matter what the mate bond asked of her, she had all of that. She also had this. The warmth of him in the bond, the dawn coming through the shutters, the sound of Lena's voice in the other room, already at full volume about something, and the knowledge that she had chosen to be here, not because she was owed anything, and not because she owed anything, but because she was a woman who walked toward difficult things with her hands open and her eyes clear and her heart, despite everything, still reaching. When Mara opened the door, her 3 children looked up at her and then past her at the man standing behind her, and the room held all 5 of them in a light that was finally, unmistakably, the beginning of morning. Callum Ashford, Alpha King of Ironveal, knelt down on the stone floor without being asked, bringing himself to eye level with his youngest daughter, who regarded him with her ancient amber eyes for a long, careful moment, and then placed both her small hands on his face the way she placed them on wounded things when she was checking if they could be healed. Yes, said Calla, apparently satisfied with whatever she found. We can stay.